everyone, I'm Whitney and today's video is how I cut off part of my finger. Yep, that is right. I managed to cut off part of my finger recently, and since it was a sewing related incident, I thought I would share the story with you all today. I know this is way different than anything that you normally expect on my channel, but this was just too much of a thing to not share, and it's something that is going to be very apparent in my upcoming videos, so I felt it was necessary to kind of explain, especially since it's a pretty interesting story. So let's get right to the point. Last weekend, my kids were at my parents' house for their first big girl sleepover with both of them. And because they were at my parents' house, I had plans to do a ton of sewing while they were gone. So I started in on a big project. It's a t-shirt quilt that I'm making for my daughter for her 3rd birthday. She loves Mickey and Minnie. So I am making a Mickey and Minnie t-shirt quilt for her gift. And I was rolling along and doing great. I had cut all the shirts and prepped them on Friday night, and then Saturday I was filming sewing them together. It's a really large project, so I had it spread out all over our living room, playroom kind of area, and it was going great. I was filming and I was getting to the part where I could kind of do a lot of sewing without having to film every single step, which, because stopping and filming every step really slows down the progress. So when I get to the stage of a project where I can do a lot of sewing and everything without having to film, things really pick up and I get a lot done in a short time. So I had finally gotten to that part, and I was about to sew a bunch together, and I thought, you know what, that piece is a little uneven. Let me trim about an 1/8 inch off of it before I keep going. So I was like, oh, I'll just do this really quick, and I was down on the floor with my cutting mat and my rotary cutter, and I'm sure you can see where this is going. And so I shoo. And I noticed something a little unusual. For one thing, it felt like my rotary cutter didn't go straight. And in fact, it had bounced up on the ruler. I've had that happen before. I've had a few cuts before. And I could tell I hit myself pretty hard because the rotary cutter kept going past my hand, even though I knew it had bumped into my hand. So I was like, ooh, that's gonna leave a pretty bad mark. You know, I better hop up and get a Band-Aid or something. And I looked down. If you can't handle gruesome things, click away now, because I'm not going to show anything bad, but I looked down and there was a piece of my finger on the ruler. And everything in my brain is just going, oh no, oh no, oh no. And so, as I mentioned, I was in like the living room area. Well, that is right across from the kitchen. So I jump up and I whirl around and I hold my finger over the sink because I knew any second it was going to start bleeding. And sure enough, as soon as I got over the sink, it started pouring blood. So there was blood just gushing out. And I wasn't sure how much of my finger I had cut off. I had seen it there, but you know, that was a split second. So I didn't know how much I cut off. I didn't know if I had just, gotten the skin or anything. And so being the good, being the decent homemaker that I am, I had started some laundry to multitask, and I was washing towels. So there was not a wash rag, a hand towel, or anything in sight. And I'm gushing blood onto my dirty dishes, by the way. So I finally am like, what can I use? I cannot stand here until this stops bleeding. It may not stop bleeding. So I grab the clean sponge and I put it under my hand and I run down to where the linens are kept, and I find a rag and I wrap that rag around my finger and I go back to my cutting mat. Not to cut, I promise. I pick up the piece that I cut off my finger and get a good look at it. And the rotary cutter had cut through my nail, through my finger, and it was bad. It was bad. I am going to see if I can upload a picture I snapped of the piece, not of my bloody finger. There's no blood at all. It's just a disembodied finger piece. I'm going to see if I can upload it to my website as like a hidden file and give the direct link below in this video. So if you are not squeamish at all and you want to see something gross, check down there. Otherwise, I will spare you all the goriness. So I like see this and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is bad. I need help. And as I failed to mention earlier, I was home alone. My husband was not home. He was photographing an event in the next town. And so I'm like, I can't drive. Even if I could wrap this up well enough that I wasn't bleeding on things, I did not feel comfortable driving because I didn't know how fast I was losing blood. There was a lot of it, and I don't know how much blood you need to lose before you start getting lightheaded and that kind of thing. So I start calling my husband, and I knew the event should be ending soon. So I start calling him, and he's not answering. And we live rurally, so there's not the best phone signal. Sometimes you can't get calls to go through. Sometimes texts take forever to go through. So I'm calling, and it's ringing and ringing and ringing. So I'm like, okay, is it not actually ringing on his end because of where I'm located? Or can he not hear his phone because of the event? Did he put it on silent? And I didn't know. So I text him. Let me get my phone and read you my texts. So I said, call me now, bunch of exclamation marks. And then after that, I put emergency because I didn't want him to think it was just like, oh, I want you to call me so I can tell you to pick up a cheeseburger on the way home, you know, because my husband knows I don't joke around. Like, I fell down the stairs a couple weeks ago and I hit the ground really hard, like on rocks, like big rocks, really hard, and bruised myself up real bad. And I just sent out a text and was like, hey, so you know, I fell. I'm going to be hurting tomorrow. You know, like, I'm pretty chill when it comes to things like that. But, so he knows, like, if I say emergency, it is legit, you know. And so I keep calling him, I call him, and he texts me, he says, I'll call you right back. And I'm like, okay, so maybe he's like trying to get out the door and then he'll call me, you know, so he doesn't disrupt the event. And he doesn't call back. And so I text, hurry. And he's still not answering. So I call my mom and I'm like, I call my parents' house and my dad answers. And I said, I'm not calling to check up on the kids, but can you actually go where the kids can't hear you? And he's like, yeah, okay. And so, you know, I'm talking on the phone with my dad and I'm like, hey, so I was using my rotary cutter and it bounced up on the ruler and I actually cut off part of my finger. It's bleeding pretty badly and I don't know what to do. I can't get a hold of Jeremiah. And my dad's like, let me have you talk to your mom. I'm like, okay. So he puts my mom on the phone. And I go through the same thing, you know. I was using my rotary cutter, it bounced up on my ruler, I cut off part of my finger, it's bleeding pretty bad, and I can't get a hold of Jeremiah, I don't know what to do. And my mom's like, you know, and she's like trying to think of like what to tell me. And she does mention maybe I should put the piece on ice, which I hadn't thought of, and put pressure on it, which I already was, and, you know, some different things like that. And, you know, they say maybe I should call my brother-in-law. He's a doctor. And, you know, and I'm saying, like, I'm trying to get a hold of Jeremiah. I can't get a hold of him and all this stuff. And so we talked for a little bit and I said, I'm going to try to call Jeremiah back. And so I tried to call him back several times. And I probably called him between 8 and 10 times during all this. So finally, Jeremiah answered and I just hear all this noise. And I couldn't hear him. And so I'm like yelling in the phone. I'm like, hello? Can you hear me? Hello? And normally, like, if I know someone's at an event and they answer the phone and I can't hear them, I assume they're like walking out the door really quickly so they don't bother people. But I was like, I don't even care. I don't care who hears me, what happens. I do not care. I need his attention. And so I'm yelling into the phone. So finally I hear him say hello, and by this point I am past all the small talk, you know, and I'm like, I I cut off part of my finger. It's bleeding badly. I need you to come home now. You know, and I hear him go, okay, I'm on my way. And I hear him holler to someone else. He's like, family emergency, I gotta go. And I can hear him like hit the, you know, he's running out the door. And then I hear him one more time, my family emergency, my wife got hurt, I gotta go. You know, and so I'm like, okay, he's on his way home. And so then I did end up talking to my brother-in-law. He gave me some tips and kind of walked me through of what will probably happen. I said, you know, should I go to like an Access Medical type place or should I go to the ER? And, you know, he gives me some advice on that. He says I should probably go to the ER because they'll be a little more, you know, they'll have more practice in this type of thing. And, you know, just different things like that. And during this time, my mom called me and I didn't answer because I was talking to my brother-in-law and he had had trouble getting a hold of me and had told my mom that he had had trouble. And so my mom's freaking out. She thinks I've like passed out on the floor and that's why I'm not answering my phone. So she calls Jeremiah and he pulls up to a stop sign on the way home and all of a sudden his phone's like bling, 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 and all his texts come in because he had not been receiving the texts. He thought I was just calling him. So the call me now, emergency, hurry, I need you to call me now, emergency, in all caps. He hadn't received any of that. So he thought, and he had only received 3 of the phone calls. So there was the one that he had like hit ignore on and said, I'll call you right back. And then like one right after that where he assumed I hadn't gotten his text yet. And then the one where I actually talked to him. That was all he got from me. So it was such a like mishap of everything of, you know, the texts weren't going through, the phone calls weren't going through, you know, nobody knew what was going on with anybody. And so later he was telling me, he was like, I look like a jerk because like when the text came through, they loaded in the right order. And so he saw the order that I had sent them and was like, oh my goodness, it looks like I told you I'll call you back. Like after you're saying it's an emergency, you know. And, but I knew like that he wasn't blowing me off. I knew the phone problems and all of that. But anyway, so he gets home and we load up in the car and my brother-in-law had asked me to send him a picture of my finger because he wanted to know how large of a piece, and he's like, I can't really tell you much of anything unless I know what we're working with. And you know, my finger itself, all you could see was blood. So based on my finger, you could not tell what was going on. But the piece that I cut off is about 1/8 inch thick, about 3/8 inch wide, and about 5/8 inch long. So in terms of a finger, that's a pretty good size. And like I said, through the nail and everything. And he wanted to know if I cut down to the bone or anything like that. He didn't know what a rotary cutter was, so he couldn't picture like the type of cut it was. Thankfully, it was a very smooth cut. The blade was really sharp. So my finger was in no way mangled or anything like that. But yeah, so Jeremiah got home. We jumped in the car. We went to the ER. And this is my first trip to the ER as an adult. I've been to the ER 2 other times for myself when I was a kid. And, you know, I expect to sit there a long time, you know. But we actually came in like right after a busy time. So there was hardly anyone there. And, you know, I walk in and my finger's all wrapped up and I'm just like, hi. And they're like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, I cut off part of my finger. And they're like, how much? And so I told them, you know. And they started checking me in. And immediately this triage nurse was like, I heard what you said. I'll go ahead and get you started. And so like instantly they had me in. And then they took me right back to a room. And like it was the fastest ER care I've ever seen in my life. Like it was movie kind of fast. And so we get back there and the guy said he wasn't going to try to stitch it back on. but he did need to put a few stitches in my finger to try to help my nail grow the correct direction. I did not cut the nail bed at the back end of the nail, but they were afraid that one side of the nail was going to try to grow wrong, so they put some stitches somewhere. I don't know. And so they had to have me wash off my finger, which was awful. That was terrible, because the water hitting the open nerves was just painful, and yeah, I wanted to pass out, and my husband had to fan me the whole time and all this stuff, and I had to get a tetanus shot while I was there, and they squirt the numbing stuff in your finger, and that stuff is terrible. He was like getting the liquid out of the bottle to squirt in my finger. I was like, are you gonna put all of that in me? Because it was this huge amount. And he's like, like some of it. And I was like, I don't even believe that. It's gonna be all of it. And sure enough, he put all of it. And it burns, and it's terrible. And I cannot do needles at all. So this was a torturous experience. But other than the needles and the sewing and all that, the people were very lovely. I could not have asked for a better emergency room experience. The only problem was that my finger still did not stop bleeding. So even when they discharged me, my finger was still bleeding. It bled through all of the bandages 2 times. And they're like, keep it up. Just keep that finger up. It'll stop. And I was really not sure if it would stop. And it took probably a day or so for it to stop bleeding. It was very, very, very tender, and my kids came back home, and then of course they're almost 3 and 4, and so they're very wild and reckless, and I ended up going to Walmart and buying a finger splint that is like for if you break your finger or whatever, and I wore that very loosely over my bandage to protect my finger from my kids because, like I said, they're maniacs. No, they're just young and they don't realize, and sometimes I don't realize where my finger is in relation to whatever, and it gets hit. But yeah, so yeah, we still went out to eat that night after we got back from the ER because we're like, dang it, it's our first kid-free weekend in over 4 years. We're going on a date. So we did, and it was good. And Jeremiah cut my meat for me because he's lovely. And yeah, so here's where we're at right now. This is Tuesday that I'm filming this video on. This happened 3 days ago, like almost exactly 3 days ago, within 1 hour of that. And it's doing good. So far, it's doing good. It looks weird. It's gonna look weird basically forever. So what they've told me to do is I have about until this evening to keep this type of bandage on it. And then after that, I'm supposed to let it have as much air as possible. But as I said, I have young children. And I am going to keep it partially covered for 2 reasons. For protection, as well as for their visual situation. I haven't told my kids what happened yet. I told them I injured my finger. It's really bad and we have to be really careful with it and we can't touch it. So that's how much they know right now. Because I don't want to scare them. I don't want them to freak out if they see me using a knife or if they see scissors, or like my oldest daughter's learning how to use scissors right now. I don't want her to think that something like that could happen to her. So I will probably keep a fun looking band-aid on it for a while, just wrapped loosely so where it can still get air, it can still heal. So it will take approximately 3 to 4 months for the skin on my finger to grow back. It will still be deformed pretty much forever because I chopped off the corner of my finger. So if you look at this finger, I took off the corner at an angle. So it's slim. The section that came off is skinny here and gets wider as it goes toward the tip. So I am literally missing like the corner of my finger. So it will always be deformed in some way from now on, but you know, hopefully it will not be too bad once the skin and everything grows back. It won't be that crazy looking. But in the meantime, while it is healing and repairing itself, I plan on wearing one of these gloves on my left hand to make it not weird or gross for anyone who clicks on a tutorial and is not expecting to see a partially regrown finger. So, yeah, I thought, you know, pick up some gloves, kind of, you know, Michael Jackson it up or whatever, you know, I don't know. So that is why in future videos you will probably see some of these. And let's talk about rotary cutter safety. Okay, so rotary cutters are sharp. Let's see. Here's the actual one that I cut my finger with, and they're a very sharp tool. I've always known that. I used to be terrified of them. I made my mom cut out all the pieces for my first quilt because I was terrified of rotary cutters. And with good reason. They, as anything with a blade, can be very harmful if not treated with respect and not treated and used with care and caution. But as time goes on, you get comfortable with things, and sometimes you get overly comfortable with things. And that's what happened in my case. I was in a hurry, I was overly comfortable, and I just cut off part of my hand. The interesting part is there are these gloves you can wear to protect yourself from rotary cutters. I have one. My mom purchased it for me 5, 6, 7 years ago. I've never used it. It could have saved me a trip to the emergency room, and I'm sure hundreds of dollars when I get that bill. Maybe thousands. I don't know. The bill will come sometime. So very, very expensive lesson learned. And I saw that glove just a couple weeks ago, and now I cannot find it. I always thought I was too cool to wear it. I didn't want it to look funny in my videos and people be like, why are you wearing a glove, you know? But now they can say, why are you wearing a glove? And I'll say, because I was stupid. And I thought I was cooler than I was, and I thought I was, you know, one of those people who wouldn't get hurt that bad. So my mom purchased me a new one because I can't find my old one, and I'm going to wear it now when I'm using my rotary cutter because I learned my lesson the expensive way, and I hope you all can learn it the easy way without having to go through what I went through. I will link to some rotary cutting gloves in the description box if you want to check them out and protect your fingers, because I really want to like zoom in on my finger, my whole finger, the last clip I have of it being whole, and do that Sarah McLachlan song from the ASPCA. Be like, send your contributions to pay off Whitney's medical bill. I'm just kidding. That's a joke. But anyway, that's the story of how I cut off part of my finger. It is not a joke at all. It truly happened. Yeah, it hurts. Right now it's throbbing really bad. When I went to change the dressing the first time, that was probably the worst pain I've ever felt in my life. I had 2 C-sections. And I think this was the worst pain I've ever felt in my life because the dressing, the like gauze and whatnots, had glued themselves to my open wound with dried blood. And it did not want to come off, and it yanked and ripped, and oh man, I soaked my finger in water to loosen it all up, and it still hurt like crazy. And because I had to rewrap my finger the first day because it bled through and it looked terrible. And when I unwrapped it that first time, there was about a second or two and then it started gushing blood again. And I thought, oh no, this thing is not going to stop bleeding. It's going to bleed forever. Not literally forever, but I thought it was going to be like days where every time I unwrapped it, it would just and start gushing blood again. And so the second time I was like, okay, I'm not unwrapping this stupid thing until it's been like 36 hours of, you know, so like the best chance I have that it won't bleed, you know. And so then it was like glued together and painful, so painful. But thankfully, when I did finally get all of it off, like all the wrapping and gauze and all that, it did not bleed. So last night when I rewrapped my finger, like unwrapped it and rewrapped it, it didn't bleed. And I'm so grateful, and no joke, prayers, I had been praying, and I shared this on Instagram and you all were praying, and I was so thankful. I shared about this on Instagram, like the picture of my bandaged hand, on April 1st. And I thought, no one's going to believe me. Like, this is legit and no one is going to believe me. And thankfully you all are so lovely that no one doubted it. And yeah, so I appreciate all the prayers that you all sent over, because my finger did not bleed when I rewrapped it yesterday, and it has started healing. And as I already said, it's going to be a long process, but the healing has started, and that's what's great. So yeah, that is it for today. Learn from my mistakes. Please use caution and safety. And that is how I cut off part of my finger.